Modern universities have reduced reading to mere data consumption, training students to scan, highlight, and regurgitate information for examinations. Yet true intellectual formation demands something entirely different, what I call the art of deep reading, a contemplative discipline practiced by the greatest minds throughout history. In my decades forming serious scholars, I have witnessed brilliant students fail to achieve authentic wisdom precisely because they never learn to read beyond the surface. They accumulate facts while their souls remain untransformed. Today, surrounded by digital distraction and academic pressure for quick results, this ancient art has nearly vanished from higher education. Yet without it, all scholarly effort remains sterile, producing technicians rather than true intellectuals. The method I share emerges from the Dominican tradition of study as prayer, where reading becomes conversation with truth itself. This is not merely a technique for academic success, but a sacred practice that forms the whole person. When you learn to read deeply, you transform not only your understanding but your very character. The great works of human wisdom await those who approach them with the reverence and discipline they deserve. Chapter 1: The Sacred Nature of Reading. Before opening any book, you must understand that reading is fundamentally a spiritual act. This truth has been forgotten in our secular academies, where texts are treated as mere repositories of information to be mined and extracted. Yet every great work emerges from a human soul wrestling with ultimate questions of existence, meaning, and truth. When you read St. Augustine's Confessions or Aquinas' Summa, you encounter not simply arguments and concepts, but the distilled wisdom of minds who devoted their lives to understanding reality itself. The ancients knew what we have forgotten: reading is a form of communion. You enter into dialogue with the greatest spirits who have ever lived, allowing their insights to penetrate your consciousness and transform your vision. This requires what I call intellectual humility, the recognition that you approach these works not as their equal, but as a student seeking wisdom from those who have traveled further along the path of truth. Modern students approach texts with a critical stance designed to find flaws and demonstrate their own cleverness. While critical analysis has its place, it must be preceded by receptive contemplation. You must first allow the author to speak fully before presuming to judge. This means reading with what the medievals called docile intellect, a mind open and eager to learn rather than defensive and combative. Sacred reading also requires proper preparation of soul and environment. Just as you would not enter a cathedral with casual irreverence, you should not approach great books without appropriate interior disposition. This means beginning with prayer or at least silent reflection, asking for the grace to understand and the wisdom to apply what you learn. It means creating physical space conducive to contemplation, free from distractions, properly lit, arranged with the reverence due to this sacred encounter. The text before you represents years or decades of an author's deepest reflection. Honor this gift by bringing your full attention and best efforts to the reading. When you approach books as sacred encounters rather than academic assignments, you open yourself to transformation that extends far beyond any classroom or examination. Chapter 2: Preparing the Interior Ground. Just as a farmer prepares soil before planting, the serious reader must cultivate interior conditions necessary for deep understanding. The mind cluttered with anxieties, ambitions, and superficial preoccupations cannot receive the subtle truths that great authors offer. This preparation is not merely practical but deeply spiritual, for it concerns the formation of your intellectual character. Begin by establishing what I call intellectual silence. This goes beyond mere absence of external noise to encompass interior quietude where the soul becomes receptive to truth. Modern students, accustomed to constant stimulation, find this silence uncomfortable at first. They reach for phones, seek distractions, or allow thoughts to scatter in 1,000 directions. Yet this restlessness reveals precisely why they struggle to understand profound texts. Depth requires stillness. Cultivate the habit of beginning each reading session with several minutes of conscious preparation. Sit quietly, allowing your breathing to settle and your mind to gather itself. Acknowledge the privilege of accessing the wisdom of great souls, and humbly request the grace to understand. This is not superstition but recognition that intellectual activity has a spiritual dimension often ignored in secular education. Physical preparation also matters profoundly. Choose a consistent place for serious reading, preferably the same chair, desk, and lighting each time. This creates what psychologists call environmental cueing, but more importantly, it establishes a sacred space dedicated to encounter with truth. Keep this space clean, ordered, and free from distractions. The external order supports and reflects interior order necessary for deep comprehension. Consider also your bodily state. Fatigue, hunger, or physical discomfort will impede understanding just as surely as mental distraction. The medievals spoke of reading as a form of prayer requiring the whole person, mind, body, and spirit working in harmony. Ensure adequate rest, proper nutrition, and physical comfort before attempting serious study. Most importantly, cultivate what I call intellectual poverty, the recognition that you approach each great work as a beginner, regardless of your academic credentials or previous knowledge. This humility opens the mind to receive insights that pride and presumption would block. Even texts you have read before can reveal new depths when approached with fresh reverence and openness. Chapter 3: The Rhythm of Contemplative Reading. Deep reading follows a natural rhythm quite different from the hurried pace demanded by academic schedules. This rhythm honors both the complexity of great texts and the limitations of human understanding. You cannot force comprehension any more than you can force a flower to bloom, yet you can create conditions where understanding naturally unfolds. Begin with what I call the panoramic view, reading through an entire work or substantial section without stopping to analyze details. This allows you to grasp the author's overall vision and movement of thought. Most students make the error of immediately diving into minute analysis, becoming lost in particulars while missing the essential architecture of ideas. Like viewing a cathedral, you must first step back to appreciate the whole before examining individual stones. During this initial reading, resist the academic impulse to highlight, underline, or take notes. Simply read with full attention, allowing the author's voice to establish itself in your consciousness. Notice where you feel resistance, confusion, or particular resonance, but do not stop to analyze these responses yet. This panoramic reading creates what the medievals called first impression, the soul's initial response to the work's essential spirit. The second movement involves what I term contemplative lingering. Return to passages that struck you as particularly significant or difficult. Read these slowly, savoring each sentence like fine wine. Great authors often compress profound insights into single phrases that reward extended meditation. When Aquinas writes that truth is the conformity of mind and reality, each word carries depths that hurried reading cannot fathom. This contemplative pace allows what I call intellectual rumination, the mind's natural process of digesting complex ideas. Just as the body requires time to absorb nutrition, the intellect needs time to assimilate wisdom. Modern education's emphasis on rapid consumption produces intellectual indigestion, leaving students overstuffed with undigested concepts they cannot truly use. Practice the ancient art of rereading with fresh eyes. Return to the same passage on different days, bringing new questions and life experiences to bear. You will discover that great texts are inexhaustible, revealing new facets as your understanding matures. What seemed obvious on first reading may prove profoundly mysterious upon deeper consideration, while initially puzzling passages suddenly illuminate with crystalline clarity. Finally, honor the natural rhythm of understanding in confusion. Intellectual growth occurs not through steady progress but through cycles of clarity and perplexity. When you encounter passages that resist comprehension, do not force understanding through mere willpower. Sometimes the mind requires time to prepare for certain truths. Mark these passages and return to them later, trusting that maturity and further reading will eventually provide the keys to comprehension. Chapter 4: The Art of Active Contemplation. True reading is never passive consumption but active engagement of the whole person with truth. This active quality distinguishes contemplative reading from both superficial scanning and mere academic analysis. You become a participant in the author's investigation of reality, bringing your own questions, experiences, and insights into creative dialogue with their vision. Active contemplation begins with what I call questioning partnership. Instead of approaching the text as an external object to be conquered, you join the author as a fellow seeker of truth. When Augustine wrestles with the nature of time or Aquinas explores the relationship between faith and reason, you wrestle alongside them, bringing your own mind to bear on these eternal questions. This creates what the ancients called intellectual sympathy, the ability to think with great minds rather than merely about them. Develop the habit of internal dialogue as you read. Ask questions not merely to test the author's logic but to deepen your own understanding. Why does this conclusion follow from these premises? What assumptions underlie this argument? How does this insight apply to contemporary situations? What would I say if I were exploring this question? This internal conversation prevents the mind from slipping into passive reception while fostering genuine engagement with ideas. Practice what I term existential application, constantly asking how these insights might transform your own life and understanding. Great books are not museum pieces to be admired from a distance but living wisdom meant to shape character and conduct. When you read about intellectual virtue in Aristotle or contemplative practice in Pseudo-Dionysius, immediately consider how these principles might be embodied in your own scholarly work and spiritual development. Cultivate the art of creative questioning, allowing the text to generate new questions rather than simply providing answers to old ones. The greatest books do not merely solve problems but reveal new depths of reality worthy of investigation. They expand your vision of what can be known and explored, opening vistas of inquiry you had not previously imagined. Engage also in what I call sympathetic criticism, the ability to identify limitations or errors in an author's thought while maintaining deep respect for their overall contribution. This requires intellectual maturity and humility, recognizing that even the greatest minds worked within historical limitations while still offering perennial insights. You can disagree with Augustine's Neoplatonic cosmology while embracing his psychological insights, or question Aquinas' scientific assumptions while learning from his metaphysical principles. Most importantly, practice contemplative integration, the ongoing work of weaving insights from different authors and texts into a coherent personal vision of truth. This prevents your reading from becoming a mere collection of unrelated facts or opinions. Instead, each new encounter with wisdom contributes to an ever-growing synthesis that becomes uniquely your own while remaining grounded in the great tradition of human wisdom. Chapter 5: The Discipline of Slow Understanding. In our age of instant information and rapid consumption, the greatest challenge facing serious readers is learning to embrace what I call the discipline of slow understanding. This discipline recognizes that profound truths cannot be grasped quickly, and that the mind's deepest comprehension occurs through patient, repeated engagement with difficult material. The academic pressure to cover extensive syllabi in limited time directly opposes this natural rhythm of intellectual formation. Slow understanding begins with the radical acceptance that confusion and initial incomprehension are normal stages in encountering great works. When you first read Plato's Republic or Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, you should expect to understand perhaps 30% of the content. This is not a failure but the natural beginning of a relationship with complex thought that will deepen over months and years. Students who expect immediate comprehension become discouraged and abandon texts that could transform their understanding if approached with proper patience. Develop what I call temporal humility, the recognition that your current level of education and life experience may not yet be adequate for certain insights. Some truths can only be grasped by minds that have been prepared through extensive reading, reflection, and life experience. Rather than becoming frustrated by your limitations, view them as an invitation to growth. Mark passages that exceed your current understanding and return to them as your intellectual maturity develops. Practice the ancient art of repetitive reading without the modern stigma attached to rereading. Great books reward multiple encounters, revealing new layers of meaning as your perspective evolves. I have read certain works of Aquinas dozens of times over several decades, and they continue to surprise me with fresh insights. Each reading brings different questions, life experiences, and accumulated wisdom to bear on the text, creating an ever-deepening appreciation of its riches. Cultivate patience with the natural rhythm of intellectual digestion. Just as physical nutrition requires time for absorption and transformation into bodily energy, intellectual nutrition requires time for ideas to be assimilated into your thinking patterns and worldview. This process cannot be rushed without creating superficial understanding that crumbles under pressure. Allow ideas to marinate in your consciousness through reflection, discussion, and practical application. Learn to distinguish between different types of difficulty in texts. Some confusion results from unfamiliar vocabulary or historical context that can be resolved through research and explanation. Other difficulties arise from the inherent complexity of the subject matter and require intellectual growth rather than additional information. Still others stem from the author's particular style or method of presentation. Identifying the source of difficulty helps you choose appropriate responses rather than abandoning challenging but rewarding texts. Embrace what I call productive struggle, the mental effort required to follow complex arguments and grasp subtle distinctions. This struggle strengthens intellectual muscle just as physical exercise strengthens the body. Students accustomed to entertainment-style education often avoid this necessary effort, but it is precisely through working with difficult material that the mind develops capacity for independent thought and subtle discrimination. Chapter 6: Integration and Synthesis. The ultimate goal of deep reading extends beyond comprehension of individual texts to the formation of what I call synthetic wisdom, the ability to integrate insights from multiple sources into a coherent vision of truth. This synthetic capacity distinguishes the true intellectual from the mere scholar, the wise person from the merely learned. It requires not only understanding individual authors but perceiving the larger conversation of which each work forms a part. Begin developing synthetic thinking by consciously seeking connections between texts you read. When studying Aristotle's Ethics, ask how his insights relate to Augustine's reflections on moral psychology or Aquinas' synthesis of virtue theory. When reading contemporary authors, consider how their arguments engage with or depart from classical sources. This comparative approach prevents your knowledge from becoming a mere collection of isolated facts and transforms it into a living dialogue between great minds across centuries. Practice what I call thematic integration, organizing your reading around enduring questions rather than chronological periods or academic disciplines. Questions such as, "What is the nature of happiness?" or "How should reason relate to faith?" appear in different forms throughout intellectual history. By tracing these themes across multiple authors and traditions, you develop appreciation for both the consistency and development of human wisdom regarding fundamental issues. Cultivate the habit of personal synthesis, regularly reflecting on how your reading has modified or enriched your own understanding of key questions. Keep a journal dedicated to this synthetic work, recording not merely what you have read but how each new encounter with wisdom has affected your thinking. This personal dialogue with your reading prevents it from remaining external accumulation and transforms it into genuine intellectual formation. Learn to identify what I term perennial insights, truths that transcend their historical context and speak to enduring human concerns. While authors write within particular cultural and intellectual circumstances, the greatest works contain wisdom that applies across time and culture. Distinguishing these perennial elements from historically conditioned details allows you to extract lasting value from texts while understanding their limitations. Develop facility with what I call creative application, the ability to apply insights from your reading to contemporary questions and situations not directly addressed by the original authors. This requires both faithful understanding of the author's principles and imaginative extension of their implications. When you can apply Aristotelian virtue theory to modern professional ethics or Augustinian psychology to contemporary spiritual direction, you demonstrate genuine mastery of your sources. Practice intellectual genealogy, tracing how ideas develop and influence subsequent thinkers. Understanding that Aquinas builds upon Aristotle, that Kant responds to Hume, or that Newman develops from the Church Fathers helps you perceive the organic growth of human understanding. This historical consciousness prevents you from treating ideas as isolated phenomena and reveals the communal nature of intellectual discovery. Most importantly, work toward what I call practical wisdom, the ability to translate insights from your reading into concrete guidance for living and working. The goal of intellectual formation is not academic success but human flourishing. Your deep reading should make you not only more knowledgeable but more wise, not only more sophisticated but more virtuous. When your study transforms your character and conduct, it achieves its highest purpose. Chapter 7: The Formation of Intellectual Character. Deep reading is ultimately about character formation, not merely information acquisition. The texts you choose to read slowly and carefully become part of your intellectual DNA, shaping not only what you think but how you think. This formative power of reading explains why the ancients were so careful about which books they admitted to their minds and why modern educators' neglect of this principle produces graduates who are technically competent but intellectually shallow. The first aspect of character formation through reading involves what I call intellectual courage, the willingness to engage with difficult questions and challenging texts rather than remaining within the comfortable boundaries of familiar ideas. This courage requires facing your own intellectual limitations honestly while persevering through the struggle necessary for growth. Many students avoid truly challenging books because they reveal the inadequacy of superficial understanding. But this avoidance perpetuates intellectual mediocrity. Cultivate intellectual humility through encounters with minds greater than your own. When you read Aquinas' systematic approach to complex theological questions or Augustine's penetrating self-analysis, you gain perspective on both the grandeur and limitations of human reason. This humility is not self-deprecation but realistic assessment of your place in the long tradition of human inquiry. It prevents intellectual pride while inspiring greater efforts toward wisdom. Develop what I term intellectual perseverance, the habit of working through difficult material rather than abandoning it at the first sign of challenge. This perseverance distinguishes serious students from casual readers and dilettantes. When you commit to understanding a challenging work completely, you develop intellectual muscles that serve you throughout life. The capacity to persist through confusion and frustration becomes a character trait that extends beyond academic work to all areas of life requiring sustained effort. Practice intellectual honesty by acknowledging when you do not understand something rather than pretending comprehension. This honesty requires confidence that admitting ignorance is the beginning of learning rather than a mark of failure. Many students develop habits of intellectual dishonesty in educational systems that punish confusion and reward the appearance of understanding. Deep reading demands authentic engagement with your own level of comprehension. Cultivate intellectual charity, the disposition to seek the strongest possible interpretation of authors with whom you disagree. This charity assumes that serious thinkers have good reasons for their positions, even when those reasons are not immediately apparent. Before criticizing an author's position, you should be able to state it so clearly and sympathetically that the author would recognize and approve your representation. This practice develops fairness and nuance in thinking while protecting against the arrogance that dismisses unfamiliar ideas too quickly. Develop intellectual patience with the natural rhythm of understanding and growth. Profound insights often emerge slowly through repeated reflection rather than sudden illumination. This patience trusts the natural processes of learning while maintaining steady effort over time. In an age of instant gratification, this patience becomes a countercultural virtue that enables sustained intellectual development. Finally, cultivate what I call intellectual generosity, the willingness to share insights from your reading with others through teaching, writing, or conversation. Knowledge that remains hoarded becomes stagnant, while wisdom shared multiplies and deepens. This generosity completes the cycle of learning by transforming you from student to teacher, from receiver to giver of intellectual gifts. Through these character traits, deep reading becomes not merely an academic exercise but a spiritual discipline that forms you into the kind of person capable of wisdom, judgment, and intellectual leadership in service of truth and human flourishing. Conclusion. The ancient art of deep reading stands as a beacon of hope in our age of distraction and superficiality. While universities focus on information processing and technical skills, this contemplative discipline offers something far more precious: the formation of minds capable of wisdom, souls prepared for truth, and characters shaped by encounter with the greatest spirits in human history. When you embrace this practice, you join a tradition that stretches from the monastery libraries of medieval Europe to the philosophical schools of ancient Athens. Remember that deep reading is not merely a study technique but a way of life that honors the sacred nature of human intellect and the precious gift of accumulated wisdom. Each time you approach a great book with the reverence and patience it deserves, you participate in the eternal conversation of minds seeking truth. This conversation transcends time, culture, and circumstance, uniting you with all those who have pursued wisdom with serious dedication. The fruits of this practice extend far beyond academic success to the formation of character, the development of judgment, and the cultivation of that practical wisdom which enables you to live well and serve others effectively. In an age that produces many specialists but few wise persons, the world desperately needs individuals formed by deep encounter with the best that has been thought and written. Begin today with a single great book, approached with the contemplative discipline I have outlined. Allow it to form you slowly, patiently, thoroughly. Trust the process, embrace the struggle, and remain faithful to the practice even when results seem slow in coming. The transformation that deep reading produces is subtle but profound, creating not merely better students but better human beings. May your reading become prayer, your study become wisdom, and your learning become service to that truth which alone can satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart.